Welcome to Inside Startup Investing, the only podcast where you can invest in every guest. On this episode, I will be speaking with the Director of Business Development of Macrovey, Matt Labinski. Macrovey is an autonomous robotics implementation and design firm. Put simply, with all of the incredible robotics innovations occurring, Macrovey sits at the center of this universe and provides a one-stop solution for large factories to identify the best robotic solutions for their situation and implements an optimized system to get the most out of their robot system. I kind of think of Macrovey as the designer and implementer of a Robotics OS, which stands for operating system. So imagine you own a warehouse where you are shipping tens of thousands of items to your customers every year and are both receiving and shipping these items out of your warehouse. You can imagine the complexity of that process. But what if you could implement autonomous robots that walk your factory floors, grabbing the right items just in time and getting them to the exact location they need to be for delivery? While this is now possible, the complexity of doing so is often far beyond the capability of e-commerce and warehouse companies that don't have major robotics teams and budgets like an Amazon or Walmart might have. That's where Macrovey comes in, sourcing the best robotics products for your needs, and they've built software from their years of experience in the industry to optimize the robotic system just for you. What I love about the model is that Macrovey not only sells the one-time equipment and install to customers, but has an ongoing recurring paid engagement with these warehouse customers to continue to make sure the robots operate at peak performance through a combination of software, data, and human support. So as they onboard more customers, the recurring revenue base also grows. Better yet, Macrovey is a winning sales pitch with millions already in annual revenue, a parent company that they were born out of with endless connections to help them sell, and their product actually saves their client money in the long run. Perhaps what I like most about this company from an investment perspective is that if you are a believer in the future of autonomous robots, Macrovey to me feels like a de-risked robotics opportunity. Instead of trying to pick what robot tech will win out, you can invest in Macrovey, which doesn't care about what robot wins out as the best. They just want to be the middle layer that ensures their implementation and ultimate operating success comes to fruition. And with the real commercial business already in place, you aren't betting on a future technology playing out. You're just betting on the continued ability of management to execute. So if the robotic space has drawn you in, but a lot of it still feels like hype, I think you'll enjoy this episode as I dive in with Matt on where Macrovey is headed. So with that, let's get on to the show and welcome Matt. Let's get into it. What is Macrovey?
Yeah, so what we do is basically we design fully autonomous robotic material handling systems for warehouses. So if you think of like those big distribution centers at the side of the highway that feel like they go on for miles, a lot of those right now are just using like conveyor belts, a lot of people. And what we do is design systems to basically replace that and have robots do all of the kind of mundane tasks and all the work to kind of optimize people's warehouses.
Obviously, that plays a critical role in kind of today's society, and as warehouses get larger, as distribution gets larger, as we have more and more packages being delivered to people, all of that kind of stuff, right? It makes a ton of sense that there is a great need for that. Help me understand, are you the technology creator of these robots? Are you the implementer of these robots? Is it a mix therein of both of those? What does it look like?
It's a mix. So we don't actually manufacture any of the robotics that we use in our systems. We have partners that do that. So what's proprietary with what we do is the software that runs the entire system. So we kind of act as the brain of the system and the middleman between the robot and then the end customer's software, whatever that may be, a WMS inventory system. And then we basically go in and custom design these systems based on a customer's pain point. So maybe they're short-staffed. Maybe there's a certain area of the warehouse where they feel like, they're lacking in movement and optimization. And we basically can just go in and design a system around that using these partner robotics, installing with our proprietary software speaking with the end customer. So we're kind of all of the above, but basically just going in and finding out how we can basically optimize these customers' warehouses.
Got it. You're basically industrial robot engineers figuring
Yes.
out the system
Yeah.
to make them most
Yeah.
efficient.
Part integrator, part engineer, part, just problem solver.
So with something like this, how do you get paid? Is this a one-off contract where you set it up and, it's a set it and forget it and you leave? Or is there an ongoing recurring fee associated with this? What does that look like?
Yeah, both actually. So with the system, the customer can pay for the system upfront, one-time payment. We also have robots as a service. So it's kind of like leasing the system. We provide maintenance, software updates, everything needed, even a person to run the system if needed. But then given that there is a software-based system, there is recurring costs in terms of, either monthly or yearly, depending on how they want to pay, software updates, maintenance fees, all of that. And then also there's the opportunity to grow the systems within the facility. So given our systems are kind of custom designed and modular, we can actually grow with the business. So they might start small with, let's just say, 5 robots. Business ramps up, they're moving more products, now they need more. We can just add on to the system as well very easily. So there's also the opportunity for like future installations, depending on how the company's doing.
What does your core business client look like?
It's all over the place right now. Really, it's anyone who needs to move things in a facility. So for instance, we have a sister company that did a lot of work for like the Amazons, FedExes, your traditional fulfillment centers. So that's a customer base. Even on a smaller level, like a 3PL doesn't have to be this 100,000 plus square foot facility. It can be a 10,000 square foot facility. We've also been doing work with the Air Force. So they have a lot of bases that they need to require moving replacement parts for planes and tools. So we can actually, pick and kit tools and parts for the planes, for the Air Force. Pharmaceuticals, we're starting to work a lot with too, moving medications around. So it's really across the board. I would say kind of e-commerce, pharmaceutical, and defense is what we're really focusing on right now. But it could even get to, the manufacturing level where there's, parts that need to be assembled. We can kit those using robots and have that sent off to an assembly area. So really anyone who needs to move materials.
I want to understand the category a bit more, so I'm going to break it down into 2 pieces. First off, can you help us understand, in terms of robotic implementation in warehouses, how well penetrated is that, and how fast a growing category is it as well?
I'm fairly new to this industry, about 5 years now, and I kind of thought everyone was using robots at this point because you always kind of see it in, clips and videos of what companies are doing, but surprisingly, not a lot of companies are. And especially when it gets to that small and medium-sized warehouse, like the big Amazons, yeah, they can afford to, kind of play around with it and test it out. But these smaller facilities, they kind of get nervous that this is going to be expensive. Is it like necessary? And that's kind of where we're playing into that. Even small warehouses can afford, a robot to do a certain task, to, take someone off just putting a piece of an item into a box over and over again all day. We can have robots do that. So yes, it is very much growing in the United States. I think I read that by 2030, it's going to be somewhere around like a $300 billion market of like industrial robotics for material handling. So it's definitely growing. There's a lot of opportunity for companies like us to kind of get in there, especially with these small, medium markets. A lot of people kind of aren't touching those. They want those big contracts with, hundreds of robots in the facility, where we want to break in and kind of show companies like, hey, you have a robot or two. You can have this small system. If it works for you, we can expand on it. If it doesn't, with robots as a service, you can kind of just end that. So I think definitely a very big market in the robotic space.
Got it. And then the second piece I'm curious about is, there's kind of 3 players that I'm understanding here. There's the warehouse, right, that needs the implementation of the robot. There's you, which is kind of the implementer, manager of, and then there's the actual tech provider, the one who creates the robots. And my question for you is, why doesn't the robotics company just do what you're doing? And why doesn't the warehouse just hire someone internally to do this? And I'm getting at that just to understand demand a bit more.
No, totally. So if you think of like the company that builds the robot, a lot of times their implementations and their installations are kind of more simplistic, like this robot is going to move something across this track or across this space. It's less of they're not going to really probably install racking or they're not going to maybe integrate conveyors into this custom system that we're building. What they do is they bring robots in, they code them to basically run certain tasks, and then their job is done. Not to it's a simple job at all. It's very difficult, but there's less customization in what the design is of the system, and why a company doesn't just have someone internally do this work. I mean, it would require a team, and that's why maybe someone like us that has this kind of knowledge of the engineering behind these robots and how to design the system, it would take a large team, a lot of money. With us, you have your kind of pay for the system, you pay for their monthly, yearly software, and then we're out of your hair versus a team where you're going to have to pay yearly, probably big salaries because they're going to have to have experience with engineering and robotics. So with us, it's kind of like we'll get it done for you. You pay your recurring costs to have it up and running, and then you don't need to hear from us again unless you want to.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Now, you hit on the market is growing fairly rapidly, and it certainly is a very, very large category. So there's leaning into future market growth. That's one aspect. But as you think about growing this business, which is already sizable, right, has millions in revenue, how are you all thinking about driving growth in the business?
I feel like we have a good grasp in a couple different industries. But yeah, like we were saying, with this growing market of 300 billion, there's a lot more out there that can be done. So I think it's just kind of really getting in front of more people, getting eyes on our systems. We are relatively new. We've been around for this robotics division about 3 years, and a lot of that was just design and development. Whereas a year and a half, we've been kind of getting out there, getting the word out about our systems, pitching them. So I think we're kind of in that early stage of opportunity because we haven't gotten in front of as many eyes as there are opportunities out there. So that's really where I kind of see the growth and where we're hoping to kind of boost the company up more.
When you think about sales life cycle, how long it takes to close a client and kind of average value of a client, how does that break down?
Given, we're custom designing systems, it can vary. I would say average 6 months to a year. That could include the design phase, procuring of all the materials and robots, then the installation and integration. So it's fortunately not too long. What we've found, though, is that a big chunk right now is just kind of getting other companies to get the buy-in internally on their end. Because again, like this is still new for a lot of people, and robotics can be kind of scary of thinking, okay, will this work? Are we just kind of like spending money on something that seems cool because it's the future? So that's kind of, I think, been the biggest time constraint for us, is just getting that internal buy-in. But fortunately, like the systems are easily deployable. Like it's really kind of just racking robots and bins. Maybe we'll throw a conveyor in there to move things around. But installation, I mean, we have a system that was pre-built but deconstructed, that was moved to a conference, and we had it up and running in about 2 days. So it's fairly easy to install. So kind of the big thing is like, okay, for the robots that we're using, what's the backlog of how many they have ahead of us that they need to build, getting them over here if they're from overseas. Not worried about tariffs and everything, but yeah, the installation is the easy part. It's kind of just the leading up that's time consuming.
And then in terms of how your business model breaks out, revenues and kind of that upfront design and implementation versus the ongoing software costs, can you help us understand what that looks like?
Yeah, in terms of like the price ranges?
Yeah, percentage basis, and price ranges would be really helpful as well, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it can vary. We've had, a customer that's kind of come to us and wants to test out how this would work. That could be a 50 grand system that maybe has like, one robot, some racking, and, being able to move bins around a warehouse using a robot. We've had another one with a big global bakery that wants to do kind of like picking and kitting of orders for stores. That could be up to $3 million. So it varies. Even some of these defense contracts we're looking at, like if they were to expand past one base, that would be, 10 million plus a base, depending on how large they are. So it's all over the place. But percentage wise, I mean, so if you think of like CapEx upfront costs, that probably makes up, 75% of the cost. And then that extra 25 is going to be that recurring or monthly or yearly fees. But again, with robots as a service, we can lease it out. You don't have to pay, $1 million plus upfront. You can lease it out over time. But really the ROI is kind of what we look at when we design our systems. And that's something that we don't want to just jam as many robots down our customers' throats so we make money on the deal. We do tons of ROI calculations to show them okay, this is how much, the system's going to cost. This is the software breakdown, but here's where you're saving as far as, maybe employees, how many more orders you can fulfill. So you're pushing out more orders than you're, getting. So the ROI is what we really pay attention to. So, that's kind of how we deal with the cost breakdown for customers.
It's certainly more cost affordable, I think, long-term to use these robots than necessarily having, multiple individuals in certain positions doing certain functions. But for those of us who aren't in the day-to-day, talk to me about a few use cases where we put this robot in place or these couple of functionalities, and now we remove 3 or 4 needed people from the system, which would cost you X. Can you give us a couple examples?
The big one that we always see is kind of picking and kitting. So that's where, you have an order of, let's just say a pair of socks, like an Amazon order, a pair of socks, laundry detergent, and a bag of chips. You have someone that's manually getting each of those items from a bin and putting it into a box and sealing it up and sending it down a conveyor where it's then loaded somewhere else by another person. So really getting rid of those kind of repetitive, mundane tasks is where we see the most ROI for customers. And again, we're not saying, oh, get rid of all of your, warehouse workers and use robots. You can use those people in different areas of the warehouse operations, which might even, if they're, what we do with a lot of our systems is provide training courses for how to use them, how to troubleshoot, how to fix them. So, these companies can train these employees who are maybe doing these more repetitive, mundane tasks on how to do things like troubleshoot the robots. And that's where we kind of see it's good career growth opportunity to have that kind of, thing on your resume. I was working with robots versus filling boxes. So that's a big one. Another thing is not so much the larger facilities that use forklifts, but some of the kind of small, medium-sized warehouses. There's people that are kind of manually walking from one end of a warehouse to another to move an item around. If you can get a robot to basically just pick something up off the floor, move it to the opposite side of the warehouse, just the time savings of how fast your facility is processing orders or moving things, it sounds very standard. But that time saving can really help to kind of, fill more orders, get things out the door faster. So that's where we see a lot of ROI.
And then when you think about use cases, it sounds like it's fairly widespread, whether it's, e-commerce, even it sounded like there's some kind of biotech stuff in there. When you look across that, it sounds like it's more than just kind of warehousing. It could also be production and those types of things as well. Do you play in that arena, or is it really focused more on warehousing and moving things around?
One of our sister companies is doing installation of systems into big warehouses. So we kind of view that as construction. And one of the things that we've kind of learned over the years is we lose a lot of materials on job sites. They're very easy to be misplaced. They're very easy to be just lost in the system somehow. So we're even looking at automation for construction sites of how we can use robotics and then the software behind it to move materials around a job site, track where it's going, track inventory, even by having a scale on the robot that, once items are taken out of this bin, it says okay, I know that, 3 of these items were requested, but let me weigh it and kind of double check that actually 3 items were taken. So it can be across the board. We even a door making company we've been speaking with of how they can automate some of the processes of shaving down wood and moving these big piles of wood across the facility. So yeah, it's really if you need something to be moved, that's where we come in and kind of design something for you.
You mentioned a sister company. What does that relationship look like? Are they helping you as a business? Are they part owners in the business?
Yeah, so the ownership is the same. We have our president, Jim Pierce. So he's the president of Macrovey. Asbigo, which is it's a sister company that does the installation work. So there isn't any, as of now, Asbigo's been kind of funding Macrovey as we've been growing, given it's been around for close to 40 years. But there is no revenue sharing between Macrovey to Asbigo. All of the IP of the software, the designs of the systems, that's all proprietary to Macrovey, so no sharing of that with Asbigo as well. But the great thing is that given they've been installing material handling systems for close to 40 years, we do have them to help with the installation of these systems. So we know we have people like ready whenever needed to be sent to a job site. We know that they've been, doing this for a long time, so we know it's going to be installed correctly. So that's really great. We also have another, I don't want to call them sister, but fairly same ownership that does controls work. So like all the electricals that go into powering a facility, we can also utilize them to do all of that for our job sites as well. So we kind of, have this three-legged stool, as we like to call it, that provides us the ability to like quickly go out and install systems. But as far as kind of revenue and IP for Macrovey itself, that's staying within Macrovey.
Well, the beauty of that is it feels as though there's kind of multiple prongs helping you to sell your products into market, right? Because it's not just coming from you, it's coming from this really well-established business, which I actually think is kind of a superpower that you all have. But in terms of being an investor in Macrovey, when you think, you're talking about a business, a Bisco that's been around for 40 years, when you think about the exit opportunity for a Macrovey, how do you think about that? What does that look like?
It's kind of been open-ended as far as what we're open to. I don't think there's like a dead set, like this is the end goal. This is our out. I know our president's talked about kind of just keeping it private, growing it as big as we can. I know the IPO has been kind of thrown out there once we get to that point, obviously. But then also just, selling to another large integrator or large robotics company is something that I know he's been open to as well. So there's no like dead end that we're, kind of considering right now, but everything's definitely on the table.
Well, it's also really cool from my perspective in that, it almost sounds as though this business, and correct me if I'm wrong, was really kind of born out of probably something identified by this legacy business.
100%.
Hey, wait a second, we need to move into this category.
100%, and dead on. So yeah, I mean, like again, a lot of these systems that other companies installing, it's like conveyor belts. It's sorting systems where it's just kind of like pushing boxes from one end to another conveyor. And we really saw like, okay, this has been around for decades, ages. It works, but like, okay, now that there's this growth in robotics, we can see exactly like what processes could be optimized using robots. And that's really kind of those first 2 years of designing and the engineering behind kind of like our base product systems was, okay, we're replicating what's going on in this warehouse and doing it now with robots. And another big one was pick to light. In a lot of fulfillment centers, you'll have this racking full of bins of items, and there'll be a light next to each one. So when an item is selected for an order, the light will go on, the person will go pull the bin, take the item out, put it in the box, turn the light off, send it down a conveyor. And instead what we're doing is instead of, like a light, it's just a request to a robotic system to have a robotic arm go and pick that item out of a bin, throw it on top of a robot. That robot will go and shoot it down a chute into a correlating bin for the order. So you are dead on. Like that's exactly kind of how this whole company started, is seeing these kind of not archaic, but older processes in warehouses. And now how can we kind of like further optimize them using robots?
Who all are you competing with? Are there other providers like you out in the market, or is it really just kind of OEMs developing the robots and just trying to implement them?
There's not direct competitors that are doing kind of what we're doing. Of course, OEMs, and we don't really see them as competitors because we're actually just trying to work with as many as possible.
Yeah.
So they might have their end customers, again, doing their kind of traditional integrations of robots, where we would come in as kind of do the extra custom designing. There are companies that have, for instance, like ASRS systems, where they do use robots to kind of pull and retrieve bins. But it's this very large fixed system that's not as customizable. And that kind of does the same thing as what ours does in terms of finding a bin, retrieving it, moving it to another side of a facility. They're just not as modular. They're a lot larger. We actually had a pharmaceutical company come to us and say like, hey, we want to have an ASRS system, but we want to have the ability to, if we have one facility that's not moving as much product, move part of those robots of that system to another facility that does have a lot. With ASRS, you could do it. It's going to take a lot of time though, because you really have to like tear down a structure versus a system like ours where it's like, all right, we'll just throw a robot and some racking, maybe even the back of a box truck, and move it to another facility. It's that simple. So yeah, there is different avenues of achieving what a warehouse wants to do. But in terms of kind of going in custom systems, that's where I think we kind of are a little bit more out of the box. And to that point as well, we actually also design these systems to be mobile. So we've designed like these robots and racking to actually fit inside of like shipping containers or back of like box trucks, delivery trucks. So you can actually have these systems moved around the country. Again, going back to the pharmaceutical use case, you have flu season in the Southeast. They moved this, mobile warehouse to the area in the Southeast to kind of fulfill all those pharmacy orders. When that flu season's done, now it's peaking in the Midwest. You can move that, mobile warehouse up there to run. So that mobile concept is something else that we haven't seen in the market, which, especially on the defense side, they're really excited about.
You're from 4.4 million in revenue in 23 to 5.8 million in 24. I don't know if you could speak to what 25 looks like, and would love to understand a little bit about the pipeline as well.
Given we kind of launched this about a year and a half ago, actually going out and speaking with customers, this year has kind of really been all about doing the cold calling, doing the conversations, going to the trade shows and showing people what we're doing. So right now we have a good amount of proposals submitted out there. What it's coming down to, of course, is end of the year budgets. We might have to do this in 2026. But especially on the defense side as well. I know especially with like the government shutdown, with the new administration, there's been a lot of like, hey, we're pausing on spending right now until we kind of figure out what's going on. And we have heard that the beginning Q1 2026 is when a lot of these government grants, a lot of these kind of innovative contracts that they give out are going to start ramping up again, which we're excited about. We did have an Air Force contract last year, or I guess this year. It feels like 2026 already. That we were awarded, and then we were submitting for phase 2. That's kind of when the shutdown happened, and we were kind of told like, okay, this is on pause. But the phase 2 is when we can actually start installing these systems into Air Force bases, which would be really exciting because, again, once we get one, show that the concept works, there's tons around the country and even across the world that we can, kind of implement these in.
Artificial intelligence, right? How does it play a role in what you all are doing? And is it a competitive threat at all, or is it just an added benefit to what you're providing?
Totally added benefit. So our software that kind of is the brains of the system, it uses machine learning to kind of predict data and also optimize the processes of the system. So for instance, let's say there's a certain item that gets picked often. Maybe that bin is in the way back of the facility, far away from the 6-axis arm that's going to be doing the picking and kitting. This software will kind of learn like, okay, these certain bins, these certain items are being picked more often. The next time I move it, or maybe even before that, I'm going to make sure that that's right next to the picking and kitting station. So it's going through these processings a lot faster. And also on those 6-axis arms, we actually have a partner that does a vision-based system for it. So it can detect if it's a bin with, Lay's in it. Maybe there's a bag of Doritos that accidentally got in there. It can detect, okay, that's not Lay's, that's in the wrong bin. I'm not going to pick that up. But also where to pick up an item. So if there's a bag of chips on the bottom of the bin and it sees a little sliver of it, but it recognizes, okay, there's things on top of that, I shouldn't even try and go pick that item. It'll find the one on the top that has the biggest surface area to, reduce the chances of mispicks. So kind of just teaching the system to learn what's going on, what gets picked often. So AI is definitely huge for us and something that we're like continually looking at how we can advance that with the systems and again, just kind of have them run on their own without really the need for humans to do it.
For those investors who are listening to this, they're on their line, they're interested, but they're not there yet. What do you want them to know?
One of our kind of software engineers who he's from the Netherlands, but he's kind of done robotics and software work all around the world. The US is definitely behind in his eyes in terms of automating facilities. I would have thought the opposite, but even in Europe, they're really doing a lot with automation. And we're kind of, again, on that forefront of being ready to kind of get them in more facilities. So I think just the growing market is something that's really exciting, even for us. that there's, a lot of warehouses out there that are short staffed. You hear the labor issues in the news all the time. This is kind of that ability to solve that issue, but also just, again, optimize all the processes that are going around in warehouses. We're just super excited about the next 5-10 years, because I think that's when the big boom is really going to happen. So we're kind of, getting in there early, which is exciting.
If you like what you heard on the show today, you can learn why Macrovey scored a 4.0 out of 5 on the Kingscrowd proprietary rating scale at kingscrowd.com. And while the window to invest on net capital has closed, stay tuned for future opportunities to invest. As always, if you liked what you heard on the show today, please like, subscribe, and share our podcast wherever you listen so more investors like you can find us. Thanks for tuning in.